The Wild Tameless is about expanding our sphere of awareness into greater fields of consciousness. Our guests share their wisdom found from branching out into the unseen realms through alternative philosophy and mystical experiences. We focus on the soul component of the human experience and also touch on mind, body, and heart as we introduce pragmatic practices to create a meaningful and fulfilling life. We touch on modalities of health, ceremony, and ritual to help people harmonize their own energy and open up to the magic around them. The Wild Tameless is nature. It's the human spirit. It's music, art, and creation itself. This podcast is about helping people open to the great mystery so that we can collectively remember our place in the web of life and reorient our way forward for generations to come. Thanks for tuning in. I'm your host, Kyle Dow. What's up, everyone? Welcome to this episode of the Wild Tameless Podcast. This is an intro episode so people could get an idea for my motivation for putting this out there, this podcast, this information, and all this stuff that I actually feel really quite passionate about. So it really is about venturing away from the mainstream awareness and expanding that a little bit and touching on things that I think are universally important, things that bring us back into connection with the natural world. So a lot of it really is about earth wisdom, and that's something that's inherent to all human beings, as we are an extension of the earth, right? Everything we consume, everything we have, everything that we are truly comes from that earth energy. And so it's about remembering that connection through these different modalities and different philosophies so that we can harmonize our experience here. And through that, ideally create longevity for not only the human species, but all these other species of animals and plant life that really we are responsible to be stewards for, right? We're not above these other different types of beings, but we're a part of. So that's kind of an ecocentric viewpoint or worldview rather than an egocentric or human-centric viewpoint. And so to get people thinking in that space, I'm going to be inviting on different guests who really are way showers for a better way forward. And so these are ceremonialists and medicine carriers, they're seekers and psychonauts, they're elders and indigenous leaders, or practitioners of any modality that heals or expands consciousness. And in that, we see the healers, the mystics, the artists, and the creators. And these are all people, again, that are thinking outside of the box with an expanded sphere of awareness. So what I'd like to do is to take that intro script and break down the different parts of it so you could really get a feel for what to expect. So it starts by saying, Wild Tameless is about expanding our sphere of awareness into greater fields of consciousness. So what does that mean? Well, we all have a sphere of awareness. And I would say that awareness is the space in which everything arises, right? So you are hearing the sound of my voice at this moment while you're also picking up other things in your experience. So other sounds, right? If you're not watching this and you're listening only to the audio, then you're going to be seeing the other things that are in your visual field. You're also going to have your thoughts that are happening at the same time, and the rest of your sensory experience, the feelings that are in your body, everything you could touch, everything you could taste, everything you could smell. And everything I just listed is actually arising in the same space. So it's arising in your sphere of awareness. That's just like a single uniform space. It's not segmented. Like the things you hear are not in a different space than the things you think. And while this kind of sounds obvious as I say it, it's not something we truly ever acknowledge. So where that becomes really interesting is to imagine in a conversation my thoughts and the words from the other person are happening in the same space, which means that it's starting to become a unified field. So our spheres of awareness overlap one another, which means that there's an opportunity for connection in that space, and probably connection beyond what we normally think is possible, because then we're getting into the space of telepathy. And we could go down this rabbit hole pretty deep, and I'll try to stay on track, because what's important in that is to recognize that we are constantly affecting and impacting one another. And that can be, telepathically, like I was just suggesting. Sometimes, somebody takes the words right out of our mouth. And I would argue that that's what's happening there. There is an overlap or a transmission of thought. And again, what's important is that there's an energetic component there too. So the vibrations that we're emitting from our energetic state are going to impact those people around us. And this is pretty easy to demonstrate. If you are ever around somebody who's angry, then you pick up on that, right? You feel that. And it goes beyond just the social behavioral cues that we are aware of. It's something that we could feel, even if that person isn't in our field of vision, even if we're not paying attention to them. So think about a busy social setting. There's an energy there that is the culmination of all the individual energies that are being brought into the space, and that has an impact on us. With that, we could be mindful to cleanse our energy after being in a busy social scenario. And we could also be mindful of managing our own state of being, right? So do we want to be walking around angry and affecting everybody with that anger? Or do we want to be walking around with a sense of peace and calm? That gives you an idea of our sphere of awareness. And I'll take it one step further in saying that our sphere of awareness can encompass our entire lived experience. So the knowledge that we have, the past experiences of our entire life, they all kind of culminate into what we know, and they carry energies as well. So it becomes this massive amalgamation of lived experience. And that's kind of like a lot to think about. And the reason why that's important is because if I think about an experience from the past, it could still bring that energy with it. So if it's a traumatic event that remains unhealed, as I think about it in the moment, or as any external event is reminiscent of that, which would be a trigger, then I'm going to come in with that former energy into the present moment. Let's not try to get too sidetracked there, but I think you get an idea for what I'm saying as we kind of think about this model of the sphere of awareness. And now we're going to introduce consciousness on top of that. So everything that's happening in our phenomenological experience is happening within our sphere of awareness, and that sphere of awareness exists within the field of consciousness. The field of consciousness is everything. Consciousness is what precedes matter. It's what precedes mind, right? It precedes my own individual thoughts. It's the foundation that comes before the emergence of anything else. And you'll hear different perspectives on this, different ideas, different models of what consciousness is. And what I'm suggesting is that it's not unique to the individual. And certainly it's not something that emerges from matter. So it's not something that comes from me because I have a brain. And I think that's very outdated awareness and philosophy and science even. And now we're going so far as to say that space-time is truly a function of our perception, in that consciousness precedes that. So again, that's something that's creating our lived experience that comes from another pre-existing phenomenon. And without being an expert in this or being able to speak it speak about it too fluently, I'll point you to somebody who can, and his name is Donald Hoffman. He's done the podcast tour, so you could check him out, and he speaks incredibly about all this. And so if you want to geek out on it, you can. So we're expanding our sphere of awareness into greater fields of consciousness, and the way that happens is anytime we alter our state of consciousness. So this could be done with breath work, it could be done with exercise, it could be done with dance and singing, and it could be done with entheogens as well. So those are the typical plant medicines or psychedelics. I use the term entheogen. The definition I have for that is anything that allows us to commune with the God within. So we're altering our state of consciousness to cut through our stories of the ego to communicate with a higher intelligence, which can be viewed as something internal, right? Like maybe our best or highest self. Or we could go so far as to say the soul, and that's something else that requires some unpacking. Or we might even transcend our individual, so to speak, awareness and access non-local information from other spaces, other locales, or other beings. So now we're getting pretty out there. The point being that our awareness can be expanded to bring in other information from other people, other beings, other dimensions even. All right, so now that we're nice and ungrounded, we'll try to reel it back in. And this is the dance, this is the dance that we're going to do on this podcast. We're going to speak about very earth-oriented 3D matters and also some modalities to really affect our wellness, our well-being, and our self-care. And then we're going to zoom out and we're going to get pretty esoteric. And hopefully I could bring a balance of that through the different guests and the topics we speak about, but time will tell. Line number 2. Our guests share their wisdom found from branching out into the unseen realms through alternative philosophy and mystical experience. So I think I covered that pretty thoroughly as I was speaking about awareness and fields of consciousness. So there are people who have intentionally gone out to broaden the map into greater territory. And I love that kind of saying to really help us visualize what we're talking about. We only know what we know, right? And then there's the unknown, and there's the unknown, the things we don't even know we don't know. And that goes forever and ever and ever, right? So we don't know anything. And maybe I'll touch on that. We're all just making stories up for what our experience is and who we are, right? So the question, who are you and where are you, are two of the first principal questions. You kind of have to dig into those to even know how to orient yourself to life. And those answers are only going to be approximate answers to the truth, right? So in that, we can remain curious and continue to ask questions and to explore inwardly and outwardly. And there's people, there's seekers who have been through the process of exploration. And so I'm going to be inviting them on to share their stories, their models, and their approximations of truth. We focus on the soul component of the human experience. So there it is again, the word soul. I guess we have to look into that a little bit. The soul for me is the undying aspect of ourself. So I ascribe to a model of reincarnation, although I haven't really landed on specifics of that. Although I do believe there is a continuum of awareness that carries on between each lifetime. So there is a part of me, an energy that came before Kyle, and when I die, it will carry on into the next experience, whether that's another human incarnation or some other form of a being in another realm. I'm not entirely sure. Though I have had direct experiences that have shown me and would suggest and allow me to have faith in something that happens after death. So death, I view as a ceremony, one of the greatest ceremonies that we have the privileges of experiencing. And so with that, it's not something to be feared, but something to be celebrated. The soul is also the energy that can really emanate through us in authenticity. It is our radical, authentic expression. It's the thing that really wants to emerge against all odds, as we do have this highly conditioned experience as humans. It's the thing that really wants to pour through us, and we are inspired when we see those people that are operating from an orientation of the soul. We really feel it, right? There's a resonance there. And usually that authenticity results in beautiful expressions and creations of art, right? It's like the thing that wants to be born from the universe through the vessel of the human is being transmitted via the soul. I hope that one lands. I might have to play it back so I remember what I said. Moving on. Again, we won't get too rabbit holed here. I'm already speaking more than I intended. We also touch on mind, body, and heart as we introduce pragmatic practices to create a meaningful and fulfilling life. So that's ultimately what it's about. We could get pretty out there in our contemplation, in our philosophy, in our mystical experiences, but it is about creating a meaningful and fulfilling life. And that's going to be something that is subjective to the individual, though I do think they are good foundations for wellness, let's say. And so we all have these different orientations in life, and a lot of people think they want to chase happiness. They're like, I just want to be happy. Okay, well, happiness is really a fleeting emotional experience. But if we are pursuing fulfillment and we're creating fulfillment in our life, that's something that's enduring, right? We could have a fulfilling life constantly through the ups and downs of the entire experience. So I could be down, in which case I wouldn't be happy, but I could still be fulfilled. And there could still be meaning in my experience of feeling down. So Nietzsche would say that men orient in a will to power, and some people would suggest that people orient in a will to pleasure. And I would say that it is important to orient towards a will to meaning, right? We have to find meaning in life. Otherwise, we're just going to get crushed by it. Life is full of challenges and burdens. And if we don't have meaning in the face of all those things, then it's easy to just get overwhelmed and to maybe want to give up. And we could see a lot of people that give up in their different addictive states or states of illness, and the mass amounts of people that commit suicide, that take their own life. And that happens all the time. And that's one of the leading causes of death, and something that we probably don't have enough awareness around. So the 4 quadrants there, again, I'm going to reiterate the mind, body, heart, and spirit. So we're going to focus a lot on that soul or spirit component because it's something that we actually neglect a lot in the West. And I would say that the neglecting of the spirit or the soul is what has caused the majority of our ailments. So ailments individually and collectively. It's easy to see that we're living out of balance and everything is suffering as a result of that. The whole ecosystems are suffering. Mental ailments are through the roof, and we have to restore that harmony. So big focus on the spirit and the soul, but mind, body, and heart, we're going to come into different modalities, philosophies, and models so people could really tend to those as well, because we have to tend to all 4 quadrants. Next line, we touch on modalities of health, ceremony, and ritual to help people harmonize their own energy and open up to the magic around them. So we're kind of pulling the picture together here. And what I'm suggesting is ceremony and ritual are really key to our human experience. There's this beautiful line by the lady who wrote Braiding Sweetgrass, and I forget her name, but she says that ceremony cultivates a sense of belonging. Because usually we're not doing it on our own. We're coming together in community, and the ceremony is in honoring the natural rhythms of nature, right? So the different cycles. This could be a full moon ceremony or a new moon ceremony or an equinox or a solstice ceremony, right? And they can also be incorporated around different traditions or lineages, right? Something that has a lot of history that humans have sat in or practiced for a long, long time. And that creates a sense of belonging. So we have ceremonial opportunities, and those are things we're going to be discussing on this podcast. Different types of ceremonies that people could get involved in. And I don't think these are things that people should approach without reverence. I think they should be learning from the wisdom carriers who know how to practice authentic ceremony. And things that are a little more looser are rituals. So I would say a ceremony is something that consists of many rituals. And rituals are something that we could do more regularly on a daily basis. And that might be something like really a meditation practice can be a ritual, right? There could be a morning ritual, there could be an evening ritual, or a gratitude practice. I would consider that a ritual. So all these things that become anchor points in our day to cultivate wellness, right? So a lot of that is in mindfulness. It's really in recognizing what we're paying attention to, what we're putting energy into to cultivate the meaningful and fulfilling life that we desire. That would also lead into harmonizing our own energy and the energy around us, and allow us to open up to the magic that constantly surrounds us. So this is like branching into the unseen realms. And I guess a quick story here for how this came to be important for me. Many years ago, probably 10 plus years ago, I was hanging out at my favorite river spot in Canmore, Alberta, in the Rocky Mountains, looking up at this stunning mountain range. And I was just hanging out drinking beer with a buddy, you know? It wasn't like an overly intentional moment. And he said to me, he asked something along the lines of what it is that I want to do with my life. And out of nowhere, without any kind of like preconceived notions or awareness or interest in anything mystical, my response was, I don't know, but there's more to the human experience than meets the eye. That was speaking about the unseen realms that I intuitively was aware of, but had never been shown or taught or contemplating these things. I just knew. And that's something that we could all tune into. And I propose that when we do, life becomes more rich and more beautiful. And that's in the magic, MAGICK. We'll speak about that at some point, but basically it means to me influencing our experience. So we have this subjective viewpoint, perception of how our life is and how the inner world interacts with the outer world. And by shaping that perception, we can, well, how about that? We can shape that perception in order to affect our experience. That's like a whole conversation on its own. So we won't dive into that too much. But life gets more wonderful and beautiful as we embrace the possibility of magic and the interconnection of all things. Next line. The wild tameless is nature. It's the human spirit, it's music, art, and creation itself. So the wild, tameless, the unborn, undying thing, it is nature, right? We know nature is so incredibly resilient and balanced and harmonized and symbiotic. Everything has a symbiotic relationship with itself, right? The here where I am in Squamish, BC, so on the land of the Squamish Nation. I should probably preface my episodes with that because it's a real honor to be here on unceded land, which is all of the land on Turtle Island, right? So the North Americas, these things that are now thought to be countries. Well, these lands were never surrendered, right? And we won't dive into that too much now, but it's important to pay homage to the people who came before us and for the people who actually have a deep relationship with the natural world and know how to live in that way. These are the wisdom keepers, the indigenous people of all the lands who practice right relationship and live in a good way. And this is going to be a major theme of the podcast as well, speaking about stuff, speaking about all that wisdom. So nature, okay, what I was starting to talk about was that here in Squamish, there's a salmon run a few times a year. I should really figure out when that is specifically to honor the cycles and recognize that cycle that's a part of bigger cycles, seasonal cycles. And when they run, a lot of them don't make it to the spawning destination or make the trip back. And maybe they're all meant to die in that process. I'm not entirely sure. I think maybe that's the case because what ends up happening is there's these fish carcasses all over. And they just are rotting on the shoreline. And it's not overly aesthetic and it's not overly pleasing to the nose. But what happens is other animals come and predate on the salmon, and they're nourished by that. And not only that, but the salmon decompose into the soil and then feed all the vegetation, all the trees, right? Everything flourishes from that depth. And that's an example of the continuum of nature. It just goes on and on and on. The death leads to the rebirth. And the wild tameless is the continuation of life itself, which truly is eternal. And again, I'm suggesting that there's something eternal in each of us. And that would be the infinite game rather than the finite game of the human experience. I will resist temptation of speaking more about the infinite game. The wild tameless is nature. It's the human spirit that goes on in the infinite game. It's music. I heard somebody say that music is the only thing that humans haven't fucked up. And that might very well be true, or there's at least an argument that could be made about it. Because music is an expression that, again, can pour through us. It can channel through us. And it's something that I've been really learning to be passionate about, even though I don't claim to be overly talented at this point in time. But it's a practice for me that I get a lot of joy from, which is the most important part, the joy. And that ties into art, again, the thing that wants to come through us. And creation itself. Creation is the wild tameless. We are all creators, and we're one step removed from the creator. And in that, we have this creative capacity. And I would say it is inherent to all beings and also incredibly important for our own well-being. If we're not being creative in some capacity, then there's a good chance that we're out of balance and not as well as we could be, not as harmonized as we could be. Last line here. This podcast is about helping people open to the great mystery so that we can collectively remember our place in the web of life and reorient our way forward for generations to come. The great mystery, the thing that is beyond our capacity as a human to know about, right? The entire cosmos and the universe that we're part of, and we don't understand it, and we pretend we do, and science pretends to have answers, and it doesn't. And they're really just best guesses until the awareness gets expanded into greater realms of consciousness. And that's what we get to do individually in our life, and that's what we get to do collectively. But it's not about figuring it out. It's not a mystery that needs to be solved. We just need to know that we're a part of something much greater than our individual triumphs and sorrows. And that faith is enough to keep us going. And I don't think this is blind faith. And that's the thing that I want to be cautionary of. There is direct experience that we can each have if we're willing and courageous enough to look for magic. We will experience it through that direct experience, that felt experience. More on the great mystery later. So that we could collectively remember our place in the web of life. Once again, we are a part of this tapestry of consciousness and energy, this ocean of information that we're just swimming in. And as we recognize that there truly is no separation, it might change how we orient ourselves to life and to the people in our life, right? Getting to a place of non-duality where the person I'm interacting with is really just another form of me, an extension of me in some capacity. Well, maybe that will lead me to be kinder and more compassionate to that other. Everything is part of creation, and separation is useful for this human experience. It's helpful to have the experience that we're meant to have as a human. And fundamentally, I would argue that it's incorrect, that non-duality is closer to ultimate reality than separation is. Again, go check out Donald Hoffman. Reorient our way forward for generations to come. And that's something that's really important as well, because in our egocentric worldview, we get to this reductionary materialistic viewpoint, and a lot of people are just chasing material wealth. And in that, we're consumptive. We're just consuming all these resources. We think that there are infinite resources on Earth. Well, there aren't. And we are actually creating a debt for future generations to pay. The way that we live right now, the lavish lifestyles that we have, even like me in my modesty, I really don't have that much, and I'm still not exempt from the guilt of that, of being consumptive in everything I do. You know, the plastic that I throw into the garbage daily, that is actually doesn't get recycled. I mean, that's a fallacy in its own. We are all creating a impact on Earth. We're creating this footprint that is going to have consequences, right? There's cause and effect. There might not be good or bad, but there's certainly cause and effect. And those who are going to pick up that debt are the generations to come. And Indigenous wisdom would suggest to think about the 7 generations ahead. Be mindful of the 7 generations prior to us and how they impact us in our conditioning, but also everything they went through for us to actually be here. Like, we are a miracle. We are our ancestors' prayers answered. And in that, we could be grateful, right, for our experience of existence, and also be mindful for those generations to come. And what we can be doing is playing this game, right? It's not so much unlike a game, this game of the human experience, play it in such a way that it enables others to play it better as well. So play it at full capacity so others could play at full capacity and the game could carry on, right? Again, the notion of the infinite game. We want to be setting up the next generations for success. And it doesn't seem like we're doing that right now. So through spreading some of this earth wisdom, I hope that people can find new ways of existing in greater harmony and really, in doing so, live at full capacity, right? It's a blessing to be here on earth, and really the kingdom is now, depending on the vantage point, the worldview that we have. And there's also a responsibility that we each have. I hope that paints a broad picture and that I didn't lose too many people in getting in the weeds a little bit there. And that's definitely something we will do. Something I enjoy doing is getting deep into contemplation and maybe even philosophical debate, depending on who I have on the podcast. And we'll also keep it grounded as much as possible. So really offering something that you could do for yourself and perhaps for others around you to have a more meaningful and fulfilling life. I am really interested in feedback and hearing from you. This will be available both as a video on YouTube and as a podcast. So you're probably hearing this in one of those formats. So maybe that's superfluous information, but that's all right. I hope to continue this dialogue and to not present myself as a teacher, but a very curious student who's always eager to expand my awareness into greater fields of consciousness. Be well, everyone. Thank you everyone for tuning in to this episode. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking, subscribing, and leaving a comment and perhaps sharing with others. And if you are curious about some of the services I offer, you can check out my website, connectionintegration.com. You'll see on there that I offer one-on-one support and guidance based around spiritual and mental wellness. I also offer nature connection experiences and plant medicine retreats throughout the year. Until next time, wishing you much curiosity, wonder, and peace as you open yourself up to the wild tameless. Be well.